The Extraordinary Adventures of Arsène Lupin, Gentleman-burglar, by Maurice Leblanc. Translated from the French, by George Moorhead. Part 2. Chapter 4. The Mysterious Traveler. The evening before, I had sent my automobile to Rouen by the highway. I was to travel to Rouen by rail, on my way to visit some friends that live on the banks of the Seine. At Paris, a few minutes before the train started, 7 gentlemen entered my compartment. 5 of them were smoking. No matter that the journey was a short one, the thought of traveling with such a company was not agreeable to me, especially as the car was built on the old model, without a corridor. I picked up my overcoat, my newspapers, and my timetable, and sought refuge in a neighboring compartment. It was occupied by a lady, who, at sight of me, made a gesture of annoyance that did not escape my notice, and she leaned toward a gentleman who was standing on the step and was, no doubt, her husband. The gentleman scrutinized me closely, and apparently my appearance did not displease him, for he smiled as he spoke to his wife with the air of one who reassures a frightened child. She smiled also, and gave me a friendly glance as if she now understood that I was one of those gallant men with whom a woman can remain shut up for 2 hours in a little box, 6 feet square, and have nothing to fear. Her husband said to her, "I have an important appointment, my dear, and cannot wait any longer. Adieu." He kissed her affectionately and went away. His wife threw him a few kisses and waved her handkerchief. The whistle sounded, and the train started. At that precise moment, and despite the protests of the guards, the door was opened, and a man rushed into our compartment. My companion, who was standing and arranging her luggage, uttered a cry of terror and fell upon the seat. I am not a coward, far from it, but I confess that such intrusions at the last minute are always disconcerting. They have a suspicious, unnatural aspect. However, the appearance of the new arrival greatly modified the unfavorable impression produced by his precipitant action. He was correctly and elegantly dressed, wore a tasteful cravat, correct gloves, and his face was refined and intelligent. But where the devil had I seen that face before? Because beyond all possible doubt I had seen it. And yet the memory of it was so vague and indistinct that I felt it would be useless to try to recall it at that time. Then, directing my attention to the lady, I was amazed at the pallor and anxiety I saw in her face. She was looking at her neighbor. They occupied seats on the same side of the compartment, with an expression of intense alarm, and I perceived that one of her trembling hands was slowly gliding toward a little traveling bag that was lying on the seat about 20 inches from her. She finished by seizing it and nervously drawing it to her. Our eyes met, and I read in hers so much anxiety and fear that I could not refrain from speaking to her. "Are you ill, madam? Shall I open the window?" Her only reply was a gesture indicating that she was afraid of our companion. I smiled as her husband had done, shrugged my shoulders, and explained to her in pantomime that she had nothing to fear, that I was there, and besides, the gentleman appeared to be a very harmless individual. At that moment, he turned toward us, scrutinized both of us from head to foot, then settled down in his corner and paid us no more attention. After a short silence, the lady, as if she had mustered all her energy to perform a desperate act, said to me, in an almost inaudible voice, "Do you know who is on our train?" "Who?" I assure you." "Who is he?" "Arsène Lupin." She had not taken her eyes off our companion, and it was to him rather than to me that she uttered the syllables of that disquieting name. He drew his hat over his face. Was that to conceal his agitation or, simply, to arrange himself for sleep? Then I said to her, "Yesterday, through contumacy, Arsène Lupin was sentenced to 20 years' imprisonment at hard labor. Therefore it is improbable that he would be so imprudent, today, as to show himself in public. Moreover, the newspapers have announced his appearance in Turkey since his escape from the Sante. But he is on this train at the present moment," the lady proclaimed, with the obvious intention of being heard by our companion. "My husband is one of the directors in the penitentiary service, and it was the station master himself who told us that a search was being made for Arsène Lupin. They may have been mistaken, dash. No, he was seen in the waiting room. He bought a first-class ticket for Rouen. He has disappeared. The guard at the waiting room door did not see him pass, and it is supposed that he had got into the express that leaves 10 minutes after us. In that case, they will be sure to catch him. Unless at the last moment he leaped from that train to come here into our train, which is quite probable, which is almost certain. If so, he will be arrested just the same. For the employees and guards would no doubt observe his passage from one train to the other. And when we arrive at Rouen, they will arrest him there. Him never. He will find some means of escape. In that case, I wish him bon voyage. But in the meantime, think what he may do. What? I don't know. He may do anything. She was greatly agitated, and, truly, the situation justified, to some extent, her nervous excitement. I was impelled to say to her, "Of course, there are many strange coincidences, but you need have no fear. Admitting that Arsène Lupin is on this train, he will not commit any indiscretion. He will be only too happy to escape the peril that already threatens him." My words did not reassure her, but she remained silent for a time. I unfolded my newspapers and read reports of Arsène Lupin's trial, but as they contained nothing that was new to me, I was not greatly interested. Moreover, I was tired and sleepy. I felt my eyelids close and my head drop. "But, monsieur, you are not going to sleep." She seized my newspaper and looked at me with indignation. "Certainly not," I said. "That would be very imprudent." "Of course," I assented. I struggled to keep awake. I looked through the window at the landscape and the fleeting clouds, but in a short time all that became confused and indistinct. The image of the nervous lady and the drowsy gentleman were effaced from my memory, and I was buried in the soothing depths of a profound sleep. The tranquility of my response was soon disturbed by disquieting dreams, wherein a creature that had played the part and bore the name of Arsène Lupin held an important place. He appeared to me with his back laden with articles of value. He leaped over walls and plundered castles. But the outlines of that creature, who was no longer Arsène Lupin, assumed a more definite form. He came toward me, growing larger and larger, leaped into the compartment with incredible agility, and landed squarely on my chest. With a cry of fright and pain, I awoke. The man, the traveler, our companion, with his knee on my breast, held me by the throat. My sight was very indistinct, for my eyes were suffused with blood. I could see the lady, in a corner of the compartment, convulsed with fright. I tried even not to resist. Besides, I did not have the strength. My temples throbbed. I was almost strangled. 1 minute more, and I would have breathed my last. The man must have realized it, for he relaxed his grip, but did not remove his hand. Then he took a cord, in which he had prepared a slipknot, and tied my wrists together. In an instant I was bound, gagged, and helpless. Certainly, he accomplished the trick with an ease and skill that revealed the hand of a master. He was, no doubt, a professional thief. Not a word, not a nervous movement, only coolness and audacity. And I was there, lying on the bench, bound like a mummy, Arsène Lupin. It was anything but a laughing matter, and yet, despite the gravity of the situation, I keenly appreciated the humor and irony that it involved. Arsène Lupin seized and bound like a novice, robbed as if I were an unsophisticated rustic. For, you must understand, the scoundrel had deprived me of my purse and wallet. Arsène Lupin, a victim, duped, vanquished. What an adventure! The lady did not move. He did not even notice her. He contented himself with picking up her traveling bag that had fallen to the floor and taking from it the jewels, purse, and gold and silver trinkets that it contained. The lady opened her eyes, trembled with fear, drew the rings from her fingers, and handed them to the man as if she wished to spare him unnecessary trouble. He took the rings and looked at her. She swooned. Then, quite unruffled, he resumed his seat, lighted a cigarette, and proceeded to examine the treasure that he had acquired. The examination appeared to give him perfect satisfaction, but I was not so well satisfied. I do not speak of the 12,000 francs of which I had been unduly deprived. That was only a temporary loss, because I was certain that I would recover possession of that money after a very brief delay, together with the important papers contained in my wallet: plans, specifications, addresses, lists of correspondence, and compromising letters. But, for the moment, a more immediate and more serious question troubled me. How would this affair end? What would be the outcome of this adventure? As you can imagine, The disturbance created by my passage through the Saint-Lazare station has not escaped my notice. Going to visit friends who knew me under the name of Guillaume Berlat, and amongst whom my resemblance to Arsène Lupin was a subject of many innocent jests, I could not assume a disguise, and my presence had been remarked. So, beyond question, the commissary of police at Rouen, notified by telegraph and assisted by numerous agents, would be awaiting the train, would question all suspicious passengers, and proceed to search the cars. Of course, I had foreseen all that, but it had not disturbed me, as I was certain that the police of Rouen would not be any shrewder than the police of Paris and that I could escape recognition. Would it not be sufficient for me to carelessly display my card as depute, thanks to which I had inspired complete confidence in the gatekeeper at Saint-Lazare? But the situation was greatly changed. I was no longer free. It was impossible to attempt one of my usual tricks. In one of the compartments, the commissary of police would find Arsène Lupin, bound hand and foot, as docile as a lamb, packed up, all ready to be dumped into a prison van. He would have simply to accept delivery of the parcel, the same as if it were so much merchandise or a basket of fruit and vegetables. Yet, to avoid that shameful denouement, what could I do? Bound and gagged as I was? And the train was rushing on toward Rouen, the next and only station. Another problem was presented, in which I was less interested, but the solution of which aroused my professional curiosity. What were the intentions of my rascally companion? Of course, if I had been alone, he could, on our arrival at Rouen, leave the car slowly and fearlessly. But the lady? As soon as the door of the compartment should be opened, the lady, now so quiet and humble, would scream and call for help. That was the dilemma that perplexed me. Why had he not reduced her to a helpless condition similar to mine? That would have given him ample time to disappear before his double crime was discovered. He was still smoking, with his eyes fixed upon the window that was now being streaked with drops of rain. Once he turned, picked up my timetable, and consulted it. The lady had to feign a continued lack of consciousness in order to deceive the enemy. But fits of coughing, provoked by the smoke, exposed her true condition. As to me, I was very uncomfortable and very tired, and I meditated, I plotted. The train was rushing on, joyously, intoxicated with its own speed. Saint Etienne. At that moment, the man arose and took 2 steps toward us, which caused the lady to utter a cry of alarm and fall into a genuine swoon. What was the man about to do? He lowered the window on our side. A heavy rain was now falling, and, by a gesture, the man expressed his annoyance at his not having an umbrella or an overcoat. He glanced at the rack. The lady's umbrella was there. He took it. He also took my overcoat and put it on. We were now crossing the Seine. He turned up the bottoms of his trousers, then leaned over and raised the exterior latch of the door. Was he going to throw himself upon the track? At that speed, it would have been instant death. We now entered a tunnel. The man opened the door halfway and stood on the upper step. What folly! The darkness, the smoke, the noise, all gave a fantastic appearance to his actions. But suddenly, the train diminished its speed. A moment later it increased its speed, then slowed up again. Probably, some repairs were being made in that part of the tunnel which obliged the trains to diminish their speed, and the man was aware of the fact. He immediately stepped down to the lower step, closed the door behind him, and leaped to the ground. He was gone. The lady immediately recovered her wits, and her first act was to lament the loss of her jewels. I gave her an imploring look. She understood, and quickly removed the gag that stifled me. She wished to untie the cords that bound me, but I prevented her. No, the police must see everything exactly as it stands. I want them to see what the rascal did to us. Suppose I pull the alarm bell? Too late. You should have done that when he made the attack on me. But he would have killed me. Ah, monsieur, didn't I tell you that he was on this train? I recognized him from his portrait, and now he has gone off with my jewels. Don't worry. The police will catch him. Catch Arsène Lupin. Never. That depends on you, madam. Listen, when we arrive at Rouen, be at the door and call. Make a noise. The police and the railway employees will come. Tell what you have seen, the assault made on me and the flight of Arsène Lupin. Give a description of him. Soft hat, umbrella, Yours gray overcoat. Yours, said she. What? Mine? Not at all. It was his. I didn't have any. It seems to me he didn't have one when he came in. Yes, yes. Unless the coat was one that someone had forgotten and left in the rack. At all events, he had it when he went away, and that is the essential point. A gray overcoat, remember? Ah, I forgot. You must tell your name first thing you do. Your husband's official position will stimulate the zeal of the police. We arrived at the station. I gave her some further instructions in a rather imperious tone. Tell them my name, Gentleman-burglar. If necessary, say that you know me. That will save time. We must expedite the preliminary investigation. The important thing is the pursuit of Arsène Lupin. Your jewels, remember? Let there be no mistake. Gentleman-burglar, a friend of your husband. I understand, Gentleman-burglar. She was already calling and gesticulating. As soon as the train stopped, several men entered the compartment. The critical moment had come. Panting for breath, the lady exclaimed. Arsène Lupin. He attacked us. He stole my jewels. I am Madame Renaud. My husband is a director of the penitentiary service. Here is my brother, Georges Ardel, director of the Credit Ruenas. You must know. She embraced a young man who had just joined us, and whom the commissary saluted. Then she continued, weeping. Yes, Arsène Lupin. While monsieur was sleeping, he seized him by the throat, mon. Berlat, a friend of my husband. The commissary asked, but where is Arsène Lupin? He leaped from the train when passing through the tunnel. Are you sure that it was he? Am I sure? I recognized him perfectly. Besides, he was seen at the Saint-Lazare station. He wore a soft hat dash. No, a hard felt, like that, said the commissary, pointing to my hat. He had a soft hat, I am sure, repeated Madame Renaud, and a gray overcoat. Yes, that is right, replied the commissary. The telegram says he wore a gray overcoat with a black velvet collar. Exactly, a black velvet collar, exclaimed Madame Renaud triumphantly. I breathed freely. The excellent friend I had in that little woman. The police agents had now released me. I bit my lips until they ran blood. Stooping over, with my handkerchief over my mouth, an attitude quite natural in a person who has remained for a long time in an uncomfortable position, and whose mouth shows the bloody marks of the gag, I addressed the commissary in a weak voice. Monsieur, it was Arsène Lupin. There is no doubt about that. If we make haste, he can be caught yet. I think I may be of some service to you. The railway car, in which the crime occurred, was detached from the train to serve as a mute witness at the official investigation. The train continued on its way to Havre. We were then conducted to the station master's office through a crowd of curious spectators. Then, I had a sudden access of doubt and discretion. Under some pretext or other, I must gain my automobile and escape. To remain there was dangerous. Something might happen, for instance a telegram from Paris, and I would be lost. Yes, but what about my thief? Abandoned to my own resources, in an unfamiliar country, I could not hope to catch him. Bah! I must make the attempt, I said to myself. It may be a difficult game, but an amusing one, and the stake is well worth the trouble. And when the commissary asked us to repeat the story of the robbery, I exclaimed, Monsieur, really, Arsène Lupin is getting the start of us. My automobile is waiting in the courtyard. If you will be so kind as to use it, we can try. The commissary smiled and replied, The idea is a good one. So good, indeed, that it is already being carried out. 2 of my men have set out on bicycles. They have been gone for some time. Where did they go? To the entrance of the tunnel. There, they will gather evidence, secure witnesses, and follow on the track of Arsène Lupin. I could not refrain from shrugging my shoulders, as I replied, Your men will not secure any evidence or any witnesses. Really? Arsène Lupin will not allow anyone to see him emerge from the tunnel. He will take the first road, to Rouen, where we will arrest him. He will not go to Rouen. Then he will remain in the vicinity, where his capture will be even more certain. He will not remain in the vicinity. Oh! And where will he hide? I looked at my watch and said, At the present moment, Arsène Lupin is prowling around the station at Darnadel. At 10:50, That is, in 22 minutes from now, he will take the train that goes from Rouen to Amiens. Do you think so? How do you know it? Oh, it is quite simple. While we were in the car, Arsène Lupin consulted my railway guide. Why did he do it? Was there, not far from the spot where he disappeared, another line of railway, a station upon that line, and a train stopping at that station? On consulting my railway guide, I found such to be the case. Really, monsieur, said the commissary, that is a marvelous deduction. I congratulate you on your skill. I was now convinced that I had made a mistake in displaying so much cleverness. The commissary regarded me with astonishment, and I thought a slight suspicion entered his official mind. Oh, scarcely that, for the photographs distributed broadcast by the police department were too imperfect. They presented an Arsène Lupin so different from the one he had before him that he could not possibly recognize me by it. But, all the same, he was troubled, confused, and ill at ease. Mon Dieu! Nothing stimulates the comprehension so much as the loss of a pocketbook and the desire to recover it. And it seems to me that if you will give me 2 of your men, we may be able— Oh, I beg of you, Monsieur le Commissaire, cried Madame Renaud. Listen to Mon. Berlat. The intervention of my excellent friend was decisive. Pronounced by her, the wife of an influential official, the name of Berlat became really my own, and gave me an identity that no mere suspicion could affect. The commissary arose and said, Believe me, Monsieur Berlat, I shall be delighted to see you succeed. I am as much interested as you are in the arrest of Arsène Lupin. He accompanied me to the automobile and introduced 2 of his men, Honoré Massol and Gaston Delivet, who were assigned to assist me. My chauffeur cranked up the car, and I took my place at the wheel. A few seconds later, we left the station. I was saved. Ah! I must confess that in rolling over the boulevards that surrounded the old Norman city, in my swift 35-horsepower Lepton, I experienced a deep feeling of pride, and the motor responded sympathetically to my desires. At right and left, the trees flew past us with startling rapidity, and I, free, out of danger, had simply to arrange my little personal affairs with the 2 honest representatives of the Rouen police who were sitting behind me. Arsène Lupin was going in search of Arsène Lupin. Modest guardians of social order, Gaston Delivet and Honoré Massol. How valuable was your assistance? What would I have done without you? Without you, many times at the crossroads, I might have taken the wrong route. Without you, Arsène Lupin would have made a mistake, and the other would have escaped. But the end was not yet. Far from it. I had yet to capture the thief and recover the stolen papers. Under no circumstances must my 2 acolytes be permitted to see those papers, much less to seize them. That was a point that might give me some difficulty. We arrived at Darnétal 3 minutes after the departure of the train. True, I had the consolation of learning that a man wearing a gray overcoat with a black velvet collar had taken the train at the station. He had bought a second-class ticket for Amiens. Certainly, my debut as detective was a promising one. Delivet said to me, The train is express, and the next stop is Monterolier-Buchy in 19 minutes. If we do not reach there before Arsène Lupin, he can proceed to Amiens or change for the train going to Clears, and, from that point, reach Dieppe or Paris. How far to Monterolier? 23 kilometers. 23 kilometers in 19 minutes. We will be there ahead of him. We were off again. Never had my faithful Reptin responded to my impatience with such ardor and regularity. It participated in my anxiety. It endorsed my determination. It comprehended my animosity against that rascally Arsène Lupin. The knave! The traitor! Turn to the right, cried Delivet, then to the left. We fairly flew, scarcely touching the ground. The milestones looked like little timid beasts that vanished at our approach. Suddenly, at a turn of the road, we saw a vortex of smoke. It was the Northern Express. For a kilometer, it was a struggle, side by side, but an unequal struggle in which the issue was certain. We won the race by 20 lengths. In 3 seconds, we were on the platform standing before the second-class carriages. The doors were opened, and some passengers alighted, but not my thief. We made a search through the compartments. No sign of Arsène Lupin. Sapristi! I cried. He must have recognized me in the automobile as we were racing, side by side, and he leaped from the train. Ah, there he is now, crossing the track. I started in pursuit of the man, followed by my two acolytes, or rather followed by one of them, for the other, Massol, proved himself to be a runner of exceptional speed and endurance. In a few moments, he had made an appreciable gain upon the fugitive. The man noticed it, leaped over a hedge, scampered across a meadow, and entered a thick grove. When we reached this grove, Massol was waiting for us. He went no farther, for fear of losing us. "Quite right, my dear friend," I said. "After such a run, our victim must be out of wind. We will catch him now." I examined the surroundings with the idea of proceeding alone in the arrest of the fugitive, in order to recover my papers, concerning which the authorities would doubtless ask many disagreeable questions. Then I returned to my companions, and said, "It is all quite easy. You, Massol, take your place at the left. You, Delivet, at the right. From there, you can observe the entire posterior line of the bush, and he cannot escape without you seeing him, except by that ravine, and I shall watch it. If he does not come out voluntarily, I will enter and drive him out toward one or the other of you. You have simply to wait. Ah, I forgot. In case I need you a pistol shot." Massol and Delivet walked away to their respective posts. As soon as they had disappeared, I entered the grove with the greatest precaution, so as to be neither seen nor heard. I encountered dense thickets, through which narrow paths had been cut, but the overhanging boughs compelled me to adopt a stooping posture. One of these paths led to a clearing in which I found footsteps upon the wet grass. I followed them. They led me to the foot of a mound which was surmounted by a deserted, dilapidated hovel. "He must be there," I said to myself. "It is a well-chosen retreat." I crept cautiously to the side of the building. A slight noise informed me that he was there, and then, through an opening, I saw him. His back was turned toward me. In 2 bounds, I was upon him. He tried to fire a revolver that he held in his hand, but he had no time. I threw him to the ground, in such a manner that his arms were beneath him, twisted and helpless, whilst I held him down with my knee on his breast. "Listen, my boy," I whispered in his ear. "I am Arsène Lupin. You are to deliver over to me, immediately and gracefully, my pocketbook and the lady's jewels, and in return therefore, I will save you from the police and enroll you amongst my friends. One word, yes or no?" "Yes," he murmured. "Very good. Your escape this morning was well planned. I congratulate you." I arose. He fumbled in his pocket, drew out a large knife, and tried to strike me with it. "Imbecile!" I exclaimed. With one hand, I parried the attack. With the other, I gave him a sharp blow on the carotid artery. He fell stunned. In my pocketbook, I recovered my papers and banknotes. Out of curiosity, I took his. Upon an envelope addressed to him, I read his name, Pierre Onfray. It startled me. Pierre Onfray, the assassin of the Rue La Fontaine at Auteuil. Pierre Onfray, he who had cut the throats of Madame Delbois and her 2 daughters. I leaned over him. Yes, those were the features which, in the compartment, had evoked in me the memory of a face I could not then recall. But time was passing. I placed in an envelope 2 banknotes of 100 francs each, with a card bearing these words: Arsène Lupin to his worthy colleagues Honoré Massol and Gaston Delivet, as a slight token of his gratitude. I placed it in a prominent spot in the room, where they would be sure to find it. Beside it, I placed Madame Renaud's handbag. Why could I not return it to the lady who had befriended me? I must confess that I had taken from it everything that possessed any interest or value, leaving there only a shell comb, a stick of rouge d'Oran for the lips, and an empty purse. But, business is business. And then, really, her husband is engaged in such a dishonorable vocation. The man was becoming conscious. What was I to do? I was unable to save him or condemn him, so I took his revolver and fired a shot in the air. My 2 acolytes will come and attend to his case, I said to myself as I hastened away by the road through the ravine. 20 minutes later, I was seated in my automobile. At 4 o'clock, I telegraphed to my friends at Rouen that an unexpected event would prevent me from making my promised visit. Between ourselves, considering what my friends must now know, my visit is postponed indefinitely. A cruel disillusion for them. At 6 o'clock, I was in Paris. The evening newspapers informed me that Pierre Onfray had been captured at last. Next day, let us not despise the advantages of judicious advertising. The Echo de France published this sensational item. Yesterday, near Buchy, after numerous exciting incidents, Arsène Lupin effected the arrest of Pierre Onfray. The assassin of the Rue La Fontaine had robbed Madame Renaud, wife of the director in the penitentiary service, in a railway carriage on the Paris-Havre line. Arsène Lupin restored to Madame Renaud the handbag that contained her jewels, and gave a generous recompense to the two detectives who had assisted him in making that dramatic arrest. Chapter 5. The Queen's Necklace. 2 or 3 times each year, on occasions of unusual importance, such as the balls at the Austrian embassy or the soirees of Lady Billingstone, the Countess de Drusibes wore upon her white shoulders the Queen's necklace. It was indeed the famous necklace, the legendary necklace that Baumer and Bassenge court jewelers had made for Madame du Barry, the veritable necklace that the Cardinal de Rohan-Soubise intended to give to Marie Antoinette, Queen of France, and the same that the adventurous Jeanne de Valois, Countess de la Motte, had pulled to pieces one evening in February, 1785, with the aid of her husband and their accomplice, Riteau de Villette. To tell the truth, the mounting alone was genuine. Riteau de Villette had kept it, whilst the Count de la Motte and his wife scattered to the 4 winds of heaven the beautiful stones so carefully chosen by Baumer. Later, he sold the mounting to Gaston de Drusibes, nephew and heir of the cardinal, who repurchased the few diamonds that remained in the possession of the English jeweler, Jeffreys, supplemented them with other stones of the same size, but of much inferior quality, and thus restored the marvelous necklace to the form in which it had come from the hands of Baumer and Bassenge. For nearly a century, the House of Drusibes had prided itself upon the possession of this historic jewel. Although adverse circumstances had greatly reduced their fortune, they preferred to curtail their household expenses rather than part with this relic of royalty. More particularly, the present count clung to it as a man clings to the home of his ancestors. As a matter of prudence, he had rented a safety deposit box at the Credit Lyonnais in which to keep it. He went for it himself on the afternoon of the day on which his wife wished to wear it, and he himself carried it back next morning. On this particular evening, at the reception given at the Palais de Castille, the Countess achieved a remarkable success, and King Christian, in whose honor the fête was given, commented on her grace and beauty. The 1,000 facets of the diamond sparkled and shone like flames of fire about her shapely neck and shoulders, and it is safe to say that none but she could have borne the weight of such an ornament with so much ease and grace. This was a double triumph, and the Count de Dreux was highly elated when they returned to their chamber in the old house of the Faubourg Saint-Germain. He was proud of his wife, and quite as proud, perhaps, of the necklace that had conferred added luster to his noble house for generations. His wife, also, regarded the necklace with an almost childish vanity, and it was not without regret that she removed it from her shoulders and handed it to her husband, who admired it as passionately as if he had never seen it before. Then, having placed it in its case of red leather, stamped with the cardinal's arms, he passed into an adjoining room which was simply an alcove or cabinet that had been cut off from their chamber, and which could be entered only by means of a door at the foot of their bed. As he had done on previous occasions, he hid it on a high shelf amongst hat boxes and piles of linen. He closed the door and retired. Next morning, he arose about 9 o'clock, intending to go to the Credit Lyonnais before breakfast. He dressed, drank a cup of coffee, and went to the stables to give his orders. The condition of one of the horses worried him. He caused it to be exercised in his presence. Then he returned to his wife, who had not yet left the chamber. Her maid was dressing her hair. When her husband entered, she asked, "Are you going out?" "Yes, as far as the bank." "Of course. That is wise." He entered the cabinet, but after a few seconds, and without any sign of astonishment, he asked, "Did you take it, my dear?" "What?" "No, I have not taken anything." "You must have moved it." "Not at all. I have not even opened that door." He appeared at the door, disconcerted, and stammered, in a scarcely intelligible voice, "You haven't. It wasn't you." "Then," She hastened to his assistance, and together, they made a thorough search, throwing the boxes to the floor and overturning the piles of linen. Then the Count said, quite discouraged, "It is useless to look any more. I put it here, on this shelf. You must be mistaken. No, it was on the shelf, nowhere else." They lighted a candle, as the room was quite dark, and then carried out all the linen and other articles that the room contained. And when the room was emptied, they confessed, in despair, that the famous necklace had disappeared. Without losing time in vain lamentations, the Countess notified the commissary of police, Mon Valorby, who came at once, and after hearing their story, inquired of the Count, "Are you sure that no one passed through your chamber during the night?" "Absolutely sure, as I am a very light sleeper. Besides, the chamber door was bolted, and I remember unbolting it this morning when my wife rang for her maid." "And there is no other entrance to the cabinet?" "None." "No windows?" "Yes, but it is closed up." "I will look at it." Candles were lighted, and Mon Valorby observed at once that the lower half of the window was covered by a large press which was, however, so narrow that it did not touch the casement on either side. "On what is this window open?" "A small inner court." "And you have a floor above this?" "Two. But on a level with the servants' floor, there is a close grating over the court. That is why this room is so dark. When the press was moved, they found that the window was fastened, which would not have been the case if anyone had entered that way. Unless, said the Count, they went out through our chamber. In that case, you would have found the door unbolted." The commissary considered the situation for a moment, then asked the Countess, "Did any of your servants know that you wore the necklace last evening?" "Certainly. I didn't conceal the fact. But nobody knew that it was hidden in that cabinet." No one. Unless—" "Be quite sure, madam, as it is a very important point." She turned to her husband and said, "I was thinking of Henriette." "Henriette? She didn't know where we kept it." "Are you sure?" "Who is this woman Henriette?" asked Mon Valorby, "A schoolmate, who was disowned by her family for marrying beneath her. After her husband's death, I furnished an apartment in this house for her and her son. She is clever with her needle and has done some work for me." "What floor is she on?" "Same as ours, at the end of the corridor. And I think the window of her kitchen opens on this little court, does it not?" "Yes, just opposite ours." "Mon!" Valorby then asked to see Henriette. They went to her apartment. She was sewing, whilst her son Raoul, about 6 years old, was sitting beside her, reading. The commissary was surprised to see the wretched apartment that had been provided for the woman. It consisted of one room without a fireplace, and a very small room that served as a kitchen. The commissary proceeded to question her. She appeared to be overwhelmed on learning of the theft. Last evening she had herself dressed the Countess and placed the necklace upon her shoulders. "Good God!" she exclaimed. "It can't be possible. And you have no idea? Not the least suspicion? Is it possible that the thief may have passed through your room?" She laughed heartily, never supposing that she could be an object of suspicion. "But I have not left my room. I never go out. And perhaps you have not seen?" She opened the kitchen window and said, "See, it is at least 3 meters to the ledge of the opposite window. Who told you that we supposed the theft might have been committed in that way?" "But the necklace was in the cabinet, wasn't it?" "How do you know that?" "Why, I have always known that it was kept there at night. It had been mentioned in my presence." Her face, though still young, bore unmistakable traces of sorrow and resignation, and it now assumed an expression of anxiety, as if some danger threatened her. She drew her son toward her. The child took her hand and kissed it affectionately. When they were alone again, the Count said to the commissary, "I do not suppose you suspect Henriette. I can answer for her. She is honesty itself." "I quite agree with you," replied Mon Valorby. "At most, I thought there might have been an unconscious complicity. But I confess that even that theory must be abandoned, as it does not help solve the problem now before us." The commissary of police abandoned the investigation, which was now taken up and completed by the examining judge. He questioned the servants, examined the condition of the bolt, experimented with the opening and closing of the cabinet window, and explored the little court from top to bottom. All was in vain. The bolt was intact. The window could not be opened or closed from the outside. The inquiries especially concerned Henriette, for, in spite of everything, they always turned in her direction. They made a thorough investigation of her past life and ascertained that, during the last 3 years, she had left the house only 4 times, and her business, on those occasions, was satisfactorily explained. As a matter of fact, she acted as chambermaid and seamstress to the Countess, who treated her with great strictness and even severity. At the end of a week, the examining judge had secured no more definite information than the commissary of police. The judge said, "Admitting that we know the guilty party, which we do not, we are confronted by the fact that we do not know how the theft was committed. We are brought face to face with 2 obstacles, a door and a window, both closed and fastened. It is thus a double mystery. How could anyone enter? And moreover, how could anyone escape, leaving behind him a bolted door and a fastened window?" At the end of 4 months, the secret opinion of the judge was that the Count and Countess, being hard-pressed for money, which was their normal condition, had sold the Queen's necklace. He closed the investigation. The loss of the famous jewel was a severe blow to the Drusibys. Their credit being no longer propped up by the reserve fund that such a treasure constituted, they found themselves confronted by more exacting creditors and moneylenders. They were obliged to cut down to the quick to sell or mortgage every article that possessed any commercial value. In brief, it would have been their ruin if 2 large legacies from some distant relatives had not saved them. Their pride also suffered a downfall, as if they had lost a quartering from their escutcheon. And, strange to relate, it was upon her former schoolmate, Henriette, that the Countess vented her spleen. Toward her, the Countess displayed the most spiteful feelings, and even openly accused her. First, Henriette was relegated to the servants' quarters, and, next day, discharged. For some time, the Count and Countess passed an uneventful life. They traveled a great deal. Only one incident of record occurred during that period. Some months after the departure of Henriette, the Countess was surprised when she received and read the following letter, signed by Henriette. "Madam, I do not know how to thank you, for it was you, was it not, who sent me that? It could not have been anyone else. No one but you knows where I live. If I am wrong, excuse me, and accept my sincere thanks for your past favors." What did the letter mean? The present or past favors of the Countess consisted principally of injustice and neglect. Why then this letter of thanks? When asked for an explanation, Henriette replied that she had received a letter through the mails, enclosing 2 banknotes of 1,000 francs each. The envelope, which she enclosed with her reply, bore the Paris postmark, and was addressed in a handwriting that was obviously disguised. Now, whence came those 2,000 francs? Who had sent them? And why had they sent them? Henriette received a similar letter and a like sum of money 12 months later, and a third time, and a fourth, and each year for a period of 6 years, with this difference, that in the 5th and 6th years the sum was doubled. There was another difference. The post office authorities having seized one of the letters under the pretext that it was not registered, the last 2 letters were duly sent according to the postal regulations, the first dated from Saint-Germain, the other from Chourisons. The writer signed the first one, Anquety, and the other, Petchard. The addresses that he gave were false. At the end of 6 years, Henriette died, and the mystery remained unsolved. All these events are known to the public. The case was one of those which excite public interest, and it was a strange coincidence that this necklace, which had caused such a great commotion in France at the close of the 18th century, should create a similar commotion a century later. But what I am about to relate is known only to the parties directly interested and a few others from whom the Count exacted a promise of secrecy. As it is probable that some day or other that promise will be broken, I have no hesitation in rending the veil and thus disclosing the key to the mystery. The explanation of the letter published in the morning papers 2 days ago, an extraordinary letter which increased, if possible, the mists and shadows that envelope this inscrutable drama. 5 days ago, a number of guests were dining with the Count de Drusibys. There were several ladies present, including his 2 nieces and his cousin, and the following gentlemen: the president of Esseville, the deputy Bocas, the Chevalier Floriani, whom the Count had known in Sicily, and General Marquis de Rouzières, an old club friend. After the repast, coffee was served by the ladies, who gave the gentlemen permission to smoke their cigarettes, provided they would not desert the salon. The conversation was general, and finally one of the guests chanced to speak of celebrated crimes. And that gave the Marquis de Rouzières, who delighted to tease the Count, an opportunity to mention the affair of the Queen's necklace, a subject that the Count detested. Each one expressed his own opinion of the affair, and of course, their various theories were not only contradictory, but impossible. "And you, monsieur," said the Countess to the Chevalier Floriani, "what is your opinion?" "Oh, I have no opinion, madam," all the guests protested, for the Chevalier had just related in an entertaining manner various adventures in which he had participated with his father, a magistrate at Palermo, and which established his judgment and taste in such matters. "I confess," said he, "I have sometimes succeeded in unraveling mysteries that the cleverest detectives have renounced, yet I do not claim to be Sherlock Holmes. Moreover, I know very little about the affair of the Queen's necklace." Everybody now turned to the Count, who was thus obliged, quite unwillingly, to narrate all the circumstances connected with the theft. The Chevalier listened, reflected, asked a few questions, and said, "It is very strange. At first sight, the problem appears to be a very simple one." The Count shrugged his shoulders. The others drew closer to the Chevalier, who continued in a dogmatic tone. "As a general rule, in order to find the author of a crime or a theft, it is necessary to determine how that crime or theft was committed, or at least how it could have been committed. In the present case, nothing is more simple, because we are face to face, not with several theories, but with one positive fact, that is to say, the thief could only enter by the chamber door or the window of the cabinet. Now, a person cannot open a bolted door from the outside. Therefore, he must have entered through the window, but it was closed and fastened, and we found it fastened afterward," declared the Count. "In order to do that," continued Floriani, without heeding the interruption, "he had simply to construct a bridge, a plank or a ladder, between the balcony of the kitchen and the ledge of the window, and as the jewel case. But I repeat that the window was fastened," exclaimed the Count impatiently. This time, Floriani was obliged to reply. He did so with the greatest tranquillity, as if the objection was the most insignificant affair in the world. "I will admit that it was, but is there not a transom in the upper part of the window?" "How do you know that?" "In the first place, that was customary in houses of that date, and in the second place, without such a transom, the theft cannot be explained. Yes, there is one, but it was closed the same as the window. Consequently, we did not pay attention to it. That was a mistake, for if you had examined it, you would have found that it had been opened." "But how?" "I presume that, like all others, it opens by means of a wire with a ring on the lower end." "Yes, but I do not see Now, through a hole in the window, a person could, by the aid of some instrument, let us say a poker with a hook at the end, grip the ring, pull down, and open the transom." The Count laughed and said, "Excellent, excellent. Your scheme is very cleverly constructed, but you overlook one thing, monsieur. There is no hole in the window." "There was a hole." "Nonsense, we would have seen it. In order to see it, you must look for it, and no one has looked. The hole is there. It must be there at the side of the window, in the putty. In a vertical direction, of course." The Count arose. He was greatly excited. He paced up and down the room 2 or 3 times in a nervous manner. Then, approaching Floriani, said, "Nobody has been in that room since. Nothing has been changed." "Very well, monsieur. You can easily satisfy yourself that my explanation is correct. It does not agree with the facts established by the examining judge. You have seen nothing, and yet you contradict all that we have seen and all that we know." Floriani paid no attention to the Count's petulance. He simply smiled and said, "Mon Dieu, monsieur, I submit my theory. That is all. If I am mistaken, you can easily prove it. I will do so at once. I confess that your assurance, The Count muttered a few more words, then suddenly rushed to the door and passed out. Not a word was uttered in his absence, and this profound silence gave the situation an air of almost tragic importance. Finally, the Count returned. He was pale and nervous. he said to his friends in a trembling voice. I beg your pardon. The revelations of the Chevalier were so unexpected. I should never have thought. His wife questioned him eagerly. Speak. What is it? He stammered. The hole is there, at the very spot at the side of the window. He seized the Chevalier's arm and said to him in an imperious tone, Now, monsieur, proceed. I admit that you are right so far, but now, that is not all. Go on. Tell us the rest of it. Floriani disengaged his arm gently, and after a moment continued. Well, in my opinion, this is what happened. The thief, knowing that the Countess was going to wear the necklace that evening, had prepared his gangway or bridge during your absence. He watched you through the window and saw you hide the necklace. Afterward, he cut the glass and pulled the ring. But the distance was so great that it would be impossible for him to reach the window fastening through the transom. Well, then, if he could not open the window by reaching through the transom, he must have crawled through the transom. Impossible. It is too small. No man could crawl through it. Then it was not a man, declared Floriani. What? If the transom is too small to admit a man, it must have been a child. A child? Did you not say that your friend Henriette had a son? Yes, a son named Raoul. Then, in all probability, it was Raoul who committed the theft. What proof have you of that? What proof? Plenty of it. For instance, he stopped and reflected for a moment, then continued. For instance, that gangway or bridge. It is improbable that the child could have brought it in from outside the house and carried it away again without being observed. He must have used something close at hand. In the little room used by Henriette as a kitchen, were there not some shelves against the wall on which she placed her pans and dishes? 2 shelves, to the best of my memory. Are you sure that those shelves are really fastened to the wooden brackets that support them? For if they are not, we could be justified in presuming that the child removed them, fastened them together, and thus formed his bridge. Perhaps, also, since there was a stove, we might find the bent poker that he used to open the transom. Without saying a word, the Count left the room. And this time, those present did not feel the nervous anxiety they had experienced the first time. They were confident that Floriani was right, and no one was surprised when the Count returned and declared, It was the child. Everything proves it. You have seen the shelves and the poker? Yes. The shells have been unnailed, and the poker is there yet. But the Countess exclaimed, You had better say it was his mother. Henriette is the guilty party. She must have compelled her son. No, declared the Chevalier. The mother had nothing to do with it. Nonsense. They occupied the same room. The child could not have done it without the mother's knowledge. True, they lived in the same room, but all this happened in the adjoining room during the night while the mother was asleep. And the necklace, said the Count. It would have been found amongst the child's things. Pardon me? He had been out. That morning, on which you found him reading, he had just come from school, and perhaps the commissary of police, instead of wasting his time on the innocent mother, would have been better employed in searching the child's desk amongst his schoolbooks. But how do you explain those 2,000 francs that Henriette received each year? Are they not evidence of her complicity? If she had been an accomplice, would she have thanked you for that money? And then, was she not closely watched? But the child, being free, could easily go to a neighboring city, negotiate with some dealer, and sell him 1 diamond or 2 diamonds, as he might wish, upon condition that the money should be sent from Paris, and that proceeding could be repeated from year to year. An indescribable anxiety oppressed the Drusibys and their guests. There was something in the tone and attitude of Floriani, something more than the Chevalier's assurance which, from the beginning, had so annoyed the Count. There was a touch of irony that seemed rather hostile than sympathetic. But the Count affected to laugh, as he said, All that is very ingenious and interesting, and I congratulate you upon your vivid imagination. No, not at all, replied Floriani, with the utmost gravity. I imagine nothing. I simply describe the events as they must have occurred. But what do you know about them? What you yourself have told me. I pictured to myself the life of the mother and child down there in the country, the illness of the mother, the schemes of and inventions of the child to sell the precious stones in order to save his mother's life, or at least soothe her dying moments. Her illness overcomes her. She dies. Years roll on. The child becomes a man, and then, and now I will give my imagination a free rein. Let us suppose that the man feels a desire to return to the home of his childhood, that he does so, and that he meets there certain people who suspect and accuse his mother. Do you realize the sorrow and anguish of such an interview in the very house wherein the original drama was played? His words seemed to echo for a few seconds in the ensuing silence, and one could read upon the faces of the Count and Countess de Dreux a bewildered effort to comprehend his meaning, and at the same time, the fear and anguish of such a comprehension. The Count spoke at last and said, "Who are you, monsieur?" "I, the Chevalier Floriani, whom you met at Palermo, and whom you have been gracious enough to invite to your house on several occasions." "Then what does this story mean?" "Oh, nothing at all. It is simply a pastime, so far as I am concerned. I endeavor to depict the pleasure that Henriette's son, if he still lives, would have in telling you that he was the guilty party, and that he did it because his mother was unhappy, as she was on the point of losing the place of a servant by which she lived, and because the child suffered at sight of his mother's sorrow." He spoke with suppressed emotion, rose partially, and inclined toward the Countess. There could be no doubt that the Chevalier Floriani was Henriette's son. His attitude and words proclaimed it. Besides, was it not his obvious intention and desire to be recognized as such? The Count hesitated. What action would he take against the audacious guest? Ring? Provoke a scandal? Unmask the man who had once robbed him? But that was a long time ago. And who would believe that absurd story about the guilty child? No, better far to accept the situation and pretend not to comprehend the true meaning of it. So the Count, turning to Floriani, exclaimed, "Your story is very curious, very entertaining. I enjoyed it much. But what do you think has become of this young man, this model son? I hope he has not abandoned the career in which he made such a brilliant debut." "Oh, certainly not. After such a debut, to steal the Queen's necklace at 6 years of age, the celebrated necklace that was coveted by Marie Antoinette, and to steal it," remarked Floriani, falling in with the Count's mood, "without costing him the slightest trouble, without anyone thinking to examine the condition of the window, or to observe that the window-sill was too clean, that window-sill which he had wiped in order to efface the marks he had made in the thick dust. We must admit that it was sufficient to turn the head of a boy at that age. It was all so easy. He had simply to desire the thing, and reach out his hand to get it. And he reached out his hand." "Both hands," replied the Chevalier, laughing. His companions received a shock. What mystery surrounded the life of the so-called Floriani? How wonderful must have been the life of that adventurer, a thief at 6 years of age, and who, today, in search of excitement or, at most, to gratify a feeling of resentment, had come to brave his victim in her own house, audaciously, foolishly, and yet with all the grace and delicacy of a courteous guest. He arose and approached the Countess to bid her adieu. She recoiled, unconsciously. He smiled. "Oh, madam, you are afraid of me. Did I pursue my role of parlor magician a step too far?" She controlled herself and replied, with her accustomed ease, "Not at all, monsieur. The legend of that dutiful son interested me very much, and I am pleased to know that my necklace had such a brilliant destiny. But do you not think that the son of that woman, that Henriette, was the victim of hereditary influence in the choice of his vocation?" He shuddered, feeling the point, and replied, "I am sure of it. And, moreover, his natural tendency to crime must have been very strong, or he would have been discouraged." "Why so?" "Because, as you must know, the majority of the diamonds were false. The only genuine stones were the few purchased from the English jeweler, the others having been sold, one by one, to meet the cruel necessities of life." "It was still the Queen's necklace, monsieur," replied the Countess haughtily, "and that is something that he, Henriette's son, could not appreciate. He was able to appreciate, madam, that, whether true or false, the necklace was nothing more than an object of parade, an emblem of senseless pride." The Count made a threatening gesture, but his wife stopped him. "Monsieur," she said, "if the man to whom you allude has the slightest sense of honor—" She stopped, intimidated by Floriani's cool manner. "If that man has the slightest sense of honor," he repeated. She felt that she would not gain anything by speaking to him in that manner, and in spite of her anger and indignation, trembling as she was from humiliated pride, she said to him, almost politely, "Monsieur, the legend says that Rateau de Villette, when in possession of the Queen's necklace, did not disfigure the mounting. He understood that the diamonds were simply the ornament, the accessory, and that the mounting was the essential work, the creation of the artist, and he respected it accordingly. Do you think that this man had the same feeling? I have no doubt that the mounting still exists. The child respected it. Well, monsieur, if you should happen to meet him, will you tell him that he unjustly keeps possession of a relic that is the property and pride of a certain family, and that, although the stones have been removed, the Queen's necklace still belongs to the house of Drusabise. It belongs to us as much as our name or our honor." The chevalier replied simply, "I shall tell him, madame." He bowed to her, saluted the count and the other guests, and departed. For days later, the Countess de Dreux found upon the table in her chamber a red leather case bearing the cardinal's arms. She opened it and found the Queen's necklace. But as all things must, in the life of a man who strives for unity and logic, converge toward the same goal, and as a little advertising never does any harm. On the following day, the Echo de France published these sensational lines. "The Queen's necklace, the famous historical jewelry stolen from the family of Drusabise, has been recovered by Arsène Lupin, who hastened to restore it to its rightful owner. We cannot too highly commend such a delicate and chivalrous act." Chapter 6. The Seven of Hearts. I am frequently asked this question. How did you make the acquaintance of Arsène Lupin? My connection with Arsène Lupin was well known. The details that I gather concerning that mysterious man, the irrefutable facts that I present, the new evidence that I produce, the interpretation that I place on certain acts of which the public has seen only the exterior manifestations without being able to discover the secret reasons or the invisible mechanism, all establish, if not an intimacy, at least amicable relations and regular confidences. But how did I make his acquaintance? Why was I selected to be his historiographer? Why I, and not someone else? The answer is simple. Chance alone presided over my choice. My merit was not considered. It was chance that put me in his way. It was by chance that I was participant in one of his strangest and most mysterious adventures, and by chance that I was an actor in a drama of which he was the marvelous stage director, an obscure and intricate drama, bristling with such thrilling events that I feel a certain embarrassment in undertaking to describe it. The first act takes place during that memorable night of June 22nd, of which so much has already been said. And, for my part, I attribute the anomalous conduct of which I was guilty on that occasion to the unusual frame of mind in which I found myself on my return home. I had dined with some friends at the Cascade restaurant, and the entire evening, whilst we smoked and the orchestra played melancholy waltzes, we talked only of crimes and thefts and dark and frightful intrigues. That is always a poor overture to a night's sleep. The St. Martins went away in an automobile. Jean Daspry, that delightful, heedless Daspry who 6 months later was killed in such a tragic manner on the frontier of Morocco. Jean Daspry and I returned on foot through the dark, warm night. When we arrived in front of the little house in which I had lived for a year at Neuilly, on the Boulevard Millau, he said to me, "Are you afraid? What an idea! But this house is so isolated. No neighbors. Vacant lots. Really, I am not a coward, and yet well, you are very cheering, I must say." "Oh, I say that as I would say anything else. The St. Martins have impressed me with their stories of brigands and thieves." We shook hands and said good night. I took out my key and opened the door. "Well, that is good," I murmured. "Antoine has forgotten to light a candle." Then I recalled the fact that Antoine was away. I had given him a short leave of absence. Forthwith, I was disagreeably oppressed by the darkness and silence of the night. I ascended the stairs on tiptoe and reached my room as quickly as possible. Then, contrary to my usual habit, I turned the key and pushed the bolt. The light of my candle restored my courage. Yet I was careful to take my revolver from its case, a large, powerful weapon, and place it beside my bed. That precaution completed my reassurance. I laid down and, as usual, took a book from my night table to read myself to sleep. Then I received a great surprise. Instead of the paper knife with which I had marked my place on the preceding, I found an envelope closed with 5 seals of red wax. I seized it eagerly. It was addressed to me and marked urgent. A letter addressed to me. Who could have put it in that place? Nervously, I tore open the envelope and read, "From the moment you open this letter, whatever happens, whatever you may hear, do not move, do not utter one cry. Otherwise you are doomed. I am not a coward, and, quite as well as another, I can face real danger, or smile at the visionary perils of imagination. But, let me repeat, I was in an anomalous condition of mind, with my nerves set on edge by the events of the evening. Besides, was there not, in my present situation, something startling and mysterious, calculated to disturb the most courageous spirit? My feverish fingers clutched the sheet of paper, and I read and reread those threatening words. Do not move, do not utter one cry. Otherwise, you are doomed. Nonsense, I thought. It is a joke, the work of some cheerful idiot. I was about to laugh, a good loud laugh. Who prevented me? What haunting fear compressed my throat? At least I would blow out the candle. No, I could not do it. Do not move, or you are doomed, were the words he had written. These auto-suggestions are frequently more imperious than the most positive realities. But why should I struggle against them? I had simply to close my eyes. I did so. At that moment, I heard a slight noise, followed by crackling sounds, proceeding from a large room used by me as a library. A small room or antechamber was situated between the library and my bedchamber. The approach of an actual danger greatly excited me, and I felt a desire to get up, seize my revolver, and rush into the library. I did not rise. I saw one of the curtains of the left window move. There was no doubt about it. The curtain had moved. It was still moving, and I saw quite distinctly, in the narrow space between the curtains and the window, a human form, a bulky mass that prevented the curtains from hanging straight. And it is equally certain that the man saw me through the large meshes of the curtain. Then, I understood the situation. His mission was to guard me while the others carried away their booty. Should I rise and seize my revolver? Impossible. He was there. At the least movement, at the least cry, I was doomed. Then came a terrific noise that shook the house. This was followed by lighter sounds, 2 or 3 together, like those of a hammer that rebounded. At least that was the impression formed in my confused brain. These were mingled with other sounds, thus creating a veritable uproar, which proved that the intruders were not only bold, but felt themselves secure from interruption. They were right. I did not move. Was it cowardice? No, rather weakness, a total inability to move any portion of my body combined with discretion, for why should I struggle? Behind that man, there were 10 others who would come to his assistance. Should I risk my life to save a few tapestries and bibelots? Throughout the night, my torture endured. Insufferable torture, terrible anguish. The noises had stopped, but I was in constant fear of their renewal. And the man who was guarding me, weapon in hand, my fearful eyes remained cast in his direction, and my heart beat, and a profuse perspiration oozed from every pore of my body. Suddenly, I experienced an immense relief. A milk wagon, whose sound was familiar to me, passed along the boulevard, and at the same time, I had an impression that the light of a new day was trying to steal through the closed window blinds. At last, daylight penetrated the room. Other vehicles passed along the boulevard, and all the phantoms of the night vanished. Then I put one arm out of the bed, slowly and cautiously. My eyes were fixed upon the curtain, locating the exact spot at which I must fire. I made an exact calculation of the movements I must make. Then, quickly, I seized my revolver and fired. I leaped from my bed with a cry of deliverance and rushed to the window. The bullet had passed through the curtain and the window glass, but it had not touched the man, for the very good reason that there was none there. Nobody. Thus, during the entire night, I had been hypnotized by a fold of the curtain. And, during that time, the malefactors, furiously, with an enthusiasm that nothing could have stopped, I turned the key, opened the door, crossed the antechamber, opened another door, and rushed into the library. But amazement stopped me on the threshold, panting, astounded, more astonished than I had been by the absence of the man. All the things that I suppose had been stolen, furniture, books, pictures, old tapestries, everything was in its proper place. It was incredible. I could not believe my eyes. Notwithstanding that uproar, those noises of removal, I made a tour, I inspected the walls, I made a mental inventory of all the familiar objects. Nothing was missing, and, what was more disconcerting, there was no clue to the intruders, not a sign, not a chair disturbed, not the trace of a footstep. Well, I said to myself, pressing my hands on my bewildered head, surely I am not crazy. I heard something. Inch by inch, I made a careful examination of the room. It was in vain, unless I could consider this as a discovery. Under a small Persian rug, I found a card, an ordinary playing card. It was the 7 of hearts. It was like any other 7 of hearts in French playing cards, with this slight but curious exception. The extreme point of each of the 7 red spots or hearts was pierced by a hole, round and regular, as if made with the point of an awl. Nothing more. A card and a letter found in a book. But was not that sufficient to affirm that I had not been the plaything of a dream? Throughout the day, I continued my searches in the library. It was a large room, much too large for the requirements of such a house, and the decoration of which attested the bizarre taste of its founder. The floor was a mosaic of multicolored stones, formed into large, symmetrical designs. The walls were covered with a similar mosaic, arranged in panels, Pompeian allegories, Byzantine compositions, frescoes of the Middle Ages. A Bacchus bestriding a cask, an emperor wearing a gold crown, a flowing beard, and holding a sword in his right hand. Quite high, after the style of an artist's studio, there was a large window, the only one in the room. That window being always open at night, it was probable that the men had entered through it by the aid of a ladder. But again, there was no evidence. The bottom of the ladder would have left some marks in the soft earth beneath the window, but there were none, nor were there any traces of footsteps in any part of the yard. I had no idea of informing the police because the facts I had before me were so absurd and inconsistent. They would laugh at me. However, as I was then a reporter on the staff of the Gil Blas, I wrote a lengthy account of my adventure, and it was published in the paper on the second day thereafter. The article attracted some attention, but no one took it seriously. They regarded it as a work of fiction rather than a story of real life. The St. Martins rallied me, but Daspry, who took an interest in such matters, came to see me, made a study of the affair, but reached no conclusion. A few mornings later, the doorbell rang, and Antoine came to inform me that a gentleman desired to see me. He would not give his name. I directed Antoine to show him up. He was a man of about 40 years of age with a very dark complexion, lively features, and whose correct dress, slightly frayed, proclaimed a taste that contrasted strangely with his rather vulgar manners. Without any preamble, he said to me, in a rough voice that confirmed my suspicion as to his social position, "Monsieur, whilst in a café, I picked up a copy of the Gil Blas and read your article. It interested me very much. Thank you. And here I am. Ah! Yes, to talk to you. Are all the facts related by you quite correct?" "Absolutely so." "Well, in that case, I can perhaps give you some information." "Very well. Proceed." "No, not yet. First, I must be sure that the facts are exactly as you have related them. I have given you my word. What further proof do you want?" "I must remain alone in this room." "I do not understand," I said with surprise. "It's an idea that occurred to me when reading your article. Certain details established an extraordinary coincidence with another case that came under my notice. If I am mistaken, I shall say nothing more, and the only means of ascertaining the truth is by my remaining in the room alone." What was at the bottom of this proposition? Later, I recalled that the man was exceedingly nervous, but at the same time, although somewhat astonished, I found nothing particularly abnormal about the man or the request he had made. Moreover, my curiosity was aroused, so I replied, "Very well. How much time do you require?" "Oh, 3 minutes, not longer. 3 minutes from now, I will rejoin you." I left the room and went downstairs. I took out my watch. 1 minute passed. 2 minutes. Why did I feel so depressed? Why did those moments seem so solemn and weird? 2 minutes and a half. 2 minutes and 3/4. Then I heard a pistol shot. I bounded up the stairs and entered the room. A cry of horror escaped me. In the middle of the room, the man was lying on his left side, motionless. Blood was flowing from a wound in his forehead. Near his hand was a revolver still smoking. But, in addition to this frightful spectacle, my attention was attracted by another object. At 2 feet from the body, upon the floor, I saw a playing card. It was the 7 of hearts. I picked it up. The lower extremity of each of the 7 spots was pierced with a small round hole. A half-hour later, the commissary of police arrived, then the coroner and the chief of the Charité Mon. The Dewey's. I had been careful not to touch the corpse. The preliminary inquiry was very brief and disclosed nothing. There were no papers in the pockets of the deceased, no name upon his clothes, no initial upon his linen, nothing to give any clue to his identity. The room was in the same perfect order as before. The furniture had not been disturbed. Yet this man had not come to my house solely for the purpose of killing himself, or because he considered my place the most convenient one for his suicide. There must have been a motive for his act of despair, and that motive was, no doubt, the result of some new fact ascertained by him during the 3 minutes he was alone. What was that fact? What had he seen? What frightful secret had been revealed to him? There was no answer to these questions. But, at the last moment, an incident occurred that appeared to us of considerable importance. As 2 policemen were raising the body to place it on a stretcher, the left hand thus being disturbed, a crumpled card fell from it. The card bore these words: Georges Andemet, 37 Rue de Berry. What did that mean? Georges Andemet was a rich banker in Paris, the founder and president of the metal exchange which had given such an impulse to the metallic industries in France. He lived in princely style, was the possessor of numerous automobiles, coaches, and an expensive racing stable. His social affairs were very select, and Madame Andemet was noted for her grace and beauty. Can that be the man's name? I asked. The chief of the Charité leaned over him. It is not he. Mon. Andemet is a thin man and slightly gray. But why this card? Have you a telephone, monsieur? Yes, in the vestibule. Come with me. He looked in the directory and then asked for number 415.21. Is Mon Andemet at home? Please tell him that, Mon. The Deweys wished him to come at once to 102 Boulevard Maillot. Very important. 20 minutes later, Mon Andemet arrived in his automobile. After the circumstances had been explained to him, he was taken in to see the corpse. He displayed considerable emotion and spoke in a low tone and apparently unwillingly. Etienne Véran, he said. You know him? No, or at least yes. By sight only. His brother. Ah, he has a brother? Yes, Alfred Véran. He came to see me once on some matter of business. I forget what it was. Where does he live? The 2 brothers live together, Rue de Provence, I think. Do you know any reason why he should commit suicide? None. He held a card in his hand. It was your card with your address. I do not understand that. It must have been there by some chance that will be disclosed by the investigation. A very strange chance, I thought, and I felt that the others entertained the same impression. I discovered the same impression in the papers next day, and amongst all my friends with whom I discussed the affair. Amid the mysteries that enveloped it, after the double discovery of the 7 of hearts pierced with 7 holes, after the 2 inscrutable events that had happened in my house, that visiting card promised to throw some light on the affair. Through it, the truth may be revealed. But, contrary to our expectations, Mon Andemet furnished no explanation. He said, I have told you all I know. What more can I do? I am greatly surprised that my card should be found in such a place, and I sincerely hope the point will be cleared up. It was not. The official investigation established that the Véran brothers were of Swiss origin, had led a shifting life under various names, frequenting gambling resorts, associating with a band of foreigners who had been dispersed by the police after a series of robberies in which their participation was established only by their flight. At number 24 Rue de Provence, where the Véran brothers had lived 6 years before, no one knew what had become of them. I confess that, for my part, the case seemed to me so complicated and so mysterious that I did not think the problem would ever be solved, so I concluded to waste no more time upon it. But Jean Dasbray, whom I frequently met at that period, became more and more interested in it each day. It was he who pointed out to me that item from a foreign newspaper which was reproduced and commented upon by the entire press. It was as follows. The first trial of a new model of submarine boat, which is expected to revolutionize naval warfare, will be given in presence of the former emperor at a place that will be kept secret until the last minute. An indiscretion has revealed its name. It is called the Seven of Hearts. The Seven of Hearts. That presented a new problem. Could a connection be established between the name of the submarine and the incidents which we have related? But a connection of what nature? What had happened here could have no possible relation with the submarine. "What do you know about it?" said Dasbray to me. "The most diverse effects often proceed from the same cause." 2 days later, the following foreign news item was received and published. It is said that the plans of the new submarine Seven of Hearts were prepared by French engineers, who, having sought in vain the support of their compatriots, subsequently entered into negotiations with the British Admiralty, without success. I do not wish to give undue publicity to certain delicate matters which once provoked considerable excitement. Yet, since all danger of injury therefrom has now come to an end, I must speak of the article that appeared in the Echo de France, which aroused so much comment at that time, and which threw considerable light upon the mystery of the Seven of Hearts. This is the article as it was published over the signature of Salvatore. The affair of the 7 Hearts. A corner of the veil raised. We will be brief. 10 years ago, a young mining engineer, Louis Lacombe, wishing to devote his time and fortune to certain studies, resigned his position he then held, and rented number 102 Boulevard Millau, a small house that had been recently built and decorated for an Italian count. Through the agency of the Varin brothers of Lausanne, one of whom assisted in the preliminary experiments and the other acted as financial agent, the young engineer was introduced to Georges Andermatt, the founder of the Metal Exchange. After several interviews, he succeeded in interesting the banker in a submarine boat on which he was working, and it was agreed that as soon as the invention was perfected, Andermatt would use his influence with the Minister of Marine to obtain a series of trials under the direction of the government. For 2 years, Louis Lacombe was a frequent visitor at Andermatt's house, and he submitted to the banker the various improvements he made upon his original plans, until one day, being satisfied with the perfection of his work, he asked Andermatt to communicate with the Minister of Marine. That day, Louis Lacombe dined at Andermatt's house. He left there about 11:30 at night. He has not been seen since. A perusal of the newspapers of that date will show that the young man's family caused every possible inquiry to be made, but without success, and it was the general opinion that Louis Lacombe, who was known as an original and visionary youth, had quietly left for parts unknown. Let us accept that theory, improbable though it be, and let us consider another question, which is a most important one for our country. What has become of the plans of the submarine? Did Louis Lacombe carry them away? Are they destroyed? After making a thorough investigation, we are able to assert positively that the plans are in existence and are now in the possession of the two brothers Varin. How did they acquire such a possession? That is a question not yet determined, nor do we know why they have not tried to sell them at an earlier date. Did they fear that their title to them would be called in question? If so, they have lost that fear, and we can announce definitely that the plans of Louis Lacombe are now the property of foreign power, and we are in a position to publish the correspondence that passed between the Varin brothers and the representative of that power. The 7 of Hearts, invented by Louis Lacombe, has been actually constructed by our neighbor. Will the invention fulfill the optimistic expectations of those who were concerned in that treacherous act? And a postscript adds, later, our special correspondent informs us that the preliminary trial of the 7 of Hearts has not been satisfactory. It is quite likely that the plans sold and delivered by the Varin brothers did not include the final document carried by Louis Lacombe to Andermatt on the day of his disappearance, a document that was indispensable to a thorough understanding of the invention. It contained a summary of the final conclusions of the inventor and estimates and figures not contained in the other papers. Without this document, the plans are incomplete, On the other hand, without the plans, the document is worthless. Now is the time to act and recover what belongs to us. It may be a difficult matter, but we rely upon the assistance of Mon Andermatt. It will be to his interest to explain his conduct, which has hitherto been so strange and inscrutable. He will explain not only why he concealed these facts at the time of the suicide of Etienne Véron, but also why he has never revealed the disappearance of the paper, a fact well known to him. He will tell why, during the last 6 years, he paid spies to watch the movements of the Véron brothers. We expect from him not only words but acts, and at once. Otherwise, the threat was plainly expressed. But of what did it consist? What whip was Solvatore, the anonymous writer of the article, holding over the head of Mon Andermatt? An army of reporters attacked the banker, and 10 interviewers announced the scornful manner in which they were treated. Thereupon, the Echo de France announced its position in these words: whether Mon Andermatt is willing or not, he will be, henceforth, our collaborator in the work we have undertaken. Dasbray and I were dining together on the day on which that announcement appeared. That evening, with the newspapers spread over my table, we discussed the affair and examined it from every point of view with that exasperation that a person feels when walking in the dark and finding himself constantly falling over the same obstacles. Suddenly, without any warning whatsoever, the door opened and a lady entered. Her face was hidden behind a thick veil. I rose at once and approached her. "Is it you, monsieur, who lives here?" she asked. "Yes, madam, but I do not understand, The gate was not locked," she explained. "But the vestibule door?" She did not reply, and it occurred to me that she had used the servant's entrance. How did she know the way? Then there was a silence that was quite embarrassing. She looked at Dasbray, and I was obliged to introduce him. I asked her to be seated and explained the object of her visit. She raised her veil, and I saw that she was a brunette with regular features and, though not handsome, she was attractive, principally on account of her sad, dark eyes. "I am Madame Andermatt," she said. "Madame Andermatt," I repeated with astonishment. After a brief pause, she continued with a voice and manner that were quite easy and natural. "I have come to see you about that affair, you know. I thought I might be able to obtain some information, Mon Dieu, madame, I know nothing but what has already appeared in the papers. But if you will point out in what way I can help you—" "I do not know. I do not know." Not until then did I suspect that her calm demeanor was assumed, and that some poignant grief was concealed beneath that air of tranquility. For a moment, we were silent and embarrassed. Then Dasbray stepped forward and said, "Will you permit me to ask you a few questions?" "Yes, yes," she cried. "I will answer. You will answer. Whatever those questions may be." "Yes." "Did you know Louis Lacombe?" he asked. "Yes, through my husband." "When did you see him for the last time?" "The evening he dined with us." "At that time, was there anything to lead you to believe that you would never see him again?" "No." "But he had spoken of a trip to Russia, in a vague way. Then you expected to see him again?" "Yes. He was to dine with us 2 days later." "How do you explain his disappearance?" "I cannot explain it." "And Mon Andermatt?" "I do not know." Yet the article published in the Echo de France indicates, yes, that the Véron brothers had something to do with his disappearance. Is that your opinion?" "Yes." "On what do you base your opinion?" "When he left our house, Louis Lacombe carried a satchel containing all the papers relating to his invention. 2 days later, my husband, in a conversation with one of the Véron brothers, learned that the papers were in their possession. And he did not denounce them?" "No." "Why not?" "Because there was something else in the satchel. Something besides the papers of Louis Lacombe." "What was it?" She hesitated, was on the point of speaking, but finally remained silent. Dasbray continued, "I presume that is why your husband has kept a close watch over their movements instead of informing the police. He hoped to recover the papers and, at the same time, that compromising article which has enabled the 2 brothers to hold over him threats of exposure and blackmail. Over him and over me." "Ah, over you also?" "Over me in particular." She uttered the last words in a hollow voice. Dasbray observed it. He paced to and fro for a moment, then, turning to her, asked, "Had you written to Louis Lacombe?" "Of course. My husband had business with him. Apart from those business letters, had you written to Louis Lacombe? Other letters? Excuse my insistence, but it is absolutely necessary that I should know the truth. Did you write other letters? Yes, she replied, blushing. And those letters came into the possession of the Varin brothers? Yes. Does Mon Andamit know it? He has not seen them, but Alfred Varin has told him of their existence and threatened to publish them if my husband should take any steps against him. My husband was afraid of a scandal, but he has tried to recover the letters? I think so, but I do not know. You see, after that last interview with Alfred Varin, and after some harsh words between me and my husband in which he called me to account, we live as strangers. In that case, as you have nothing to lose, what do you fear? I may be indifferent to him now, but I am the woman that he has loved, the one he would still love. Oh, I am quite sure of that, she murmured in a fervent voice. He would still love me if he had not got hold of those cursed letters. What? Did he succeed? But the two brothers still defied him. Yes, and they boasted of having a secure hiding place. Well, I believe my husband discovered that hiding place. Ah, where was it? Here? I cried in alarm. Yes, I always had that suspicion. Louis Lacombe was very ingenious and amused himself in his leisure hours by making safes and locks. No doubt, the Varin brothers were aware of that fact and utilized one of Lacombe's safes in which to conceal the letters. And other things, perhaps, but they did not live here, I said. Before you came, for months ago, the house had been vacant for some time, and they may have thought that your presence here would not interfere with them when they wanted to get the papers. But they did not count on my husband, who came here on the night of June 22nd, forced the safe, took what he was seeking, and left his card to inform the two brothers that he feared them no more, and that their positions were now reversed. 2 days later, after reading the article in the Gil Blas, Etienne Varin came here, remained alone in this room, found the safe empty, and killed himself. After a moment, Dasbrai said, "A very simple theory. Has Mon Andamit spoken to you since then?" "No." "Has his attitude toward you changed in any way? Does he appear more gloomy, more anxious?" "No, I haven't noticed any change. And yet you think he has secured the letters." "Now, in my opinion, he has not got those letters. And it was not he who came here on the night of June 22nd. Who was it then?" "The mysterious individual who is managing this affair, who holds all the threads in his hands, and whose invisible but far-reaching power we have felt from the beginning. It was he and his friends who entered this house on June 22nd. It was he who discovered the hiding place of the papers. It was he who left Mon Andermit's card. It is he who now holds the correspondence and the evidence of the treachery of the Varin brothers." "Who is he?" I asked impatiently. "The man who writes letters to the Echo de France." "Salvatore, have we not convincing evidence of that fact? Does he not mention in his letters certain details that no one could know, except the man who had thus discovered the secrets of the two brothers?" "Well, then," stammered Madame Andamit in great alarm, "he has my letters also, and it is he who now threatens my husband." "Mon Dieu, what am I to do?" "Write to him," declared Dasbrai. "Confide in him without reserve. Tell him all you know and all you may hereafter learn. Your interest and his interest are the same. He is not working against Mon Andamit, but against Alfred Varin. Help him." "How?" "Has your husband the document that completes the plans of Louis Lacombe?" "Yes." "Tell that to Salvatore, and, if possible, procure the document for him. Write to him at once. You risk nothing." The advice was bold, dangerous even at first sight, but Madame Andamit had no choice. Besides, as Dasbrai had said, she ran no risk. If the unknown writer were an enemy, that step would not aggravate the situation. If he were a stranger seeking to accomplish a particular purpose, he would attach to those letters only a secondary importance. Whatever might happen, it was the only solution offered to her, and she, in her anxiety, was only too glad to act on it. She thanked us effusively and promised to keep us informed. In fact, 2 days later, she sent us the following letter that she had received from Salvatore. "Have not found the letters, but I will get them. Rest easy. I am watching everything." I looked at the letter. It was in the same handwriting as the note I found in my book on the night of June 22nd. By was right. Salvatore was indeed the originator of that affair. We were beginning to see a little light coming out of the darkness that surrounded us, and an unexpected light was thrown on certain points. But other points yet remained obscure. For instance, the finding of the two Seven of Hearts. Perhaps I was unnecessarily concerned about those two cards whose 7 punctured spots had appeared to me under such startling circumstances. Yet I could not refrain from asking myself, what role will they play in the drama? What importance do they bear? What conclusion must be drawn from the fact that the submarine constructed from the plans of Louis Lacombe bore the name of Seven of Hearts? By gave little thought to the other two cards. He devoted all his attention to another problem, which he considered more urgent. He was seeking the famous hiding place. And who knows, said he, I may find the letters that Salvatore did not find, by inadvertence, perhaps. It is improbable that the Varin brothers would have removed from a spot which they deemed inaccessible the weapon which was so valuable to them. And he continued to search. In a short time, the large room held no more secrets for him. So he extended his investigations to the other rooms. He examined the interior and the exterior, the stones of the foundation, the bricks in the walls. He raised the slates of the roof. One day, he came with a pickaxe and a spade, gave me the spade, kept the pickaxe, pointed to the adjacent vacant lots, and said, come. I followed him, but I lacked his enthusiasm. He divided the vacant land into several sections which he examined in turn. At last, in a corner, at the angle formed by the walls of two neighboring proprietors, a small pile of earth and gravel, covered with briars and grass, attracted his attention. He attacked it. I was obliged to help him. For an hour, under a hot sun, we labored without success. I was discouraged, but By urged me on. His ardor was as strong as ever. At last, Dasbury's pickaxe unearthed some bones, the remains of a skeleton to which some scraps of clothing still hung. Suddenly, I turned pale. I had discovered, sticking in the earth, a small piece of iron cut in the form of a rectangle, on which I thought I could see red spots. I stooped and picked it up. That little iron plate was the exact size of a playing card, and the red spots, made with red lead, were arranged upon it in a manner similar to the Seven of Hearts, and each spot was pierced with a round hole similar to the perforations in the two playing cards. Listen, By, I have had enough of this. You can stay if it interests you. But I am going. Was that simply the expression of my excited nerves? Or was it the result of a laborious task executed under a burning sun? I know that I trembled as I walked away, and that I went to bed, where I remained 48 hours, restless and feverish, haunted by skeletons that danced around me and threw their bleeding hearts at my head. By was faithful to me. He came to my house every day and remained 3 or 4 hours, which he spent in the large room, ferreting, thumping, tapping. The letters are here, in this room, he said from time to time. They are here. I will stake my life on it. On the morning of the 3rd day, I arose, feeble yet, but cured. A substantial breakfast cheered me up. But a letter that I received that afternoon contributed, more than anything else, to my complete recovery, and aroused in me a lively curiosity. This was the letter. Monsieur, the drama, the first act of which transpired on the night of June 22nd, is now drawing to a close. Force of circumstances compel me to bring the two principal actors in that drama face to face, and I wish that meeting to take place in your house, if you will be so kind as to give me the use of it for this evening from 9 o'clock to 11. It will be advisable to give your servant leave of absence for the evening, and perhaps you will be so kind as to leave the field open to the two adversaries. You will remember that when I visited your house on the night of June 22nd, I took excellent care of your property. I feel that I would do you an injustice if I should doubt, for one moment, your absolute discretion in this affair. Your devoted, Salvatore. I was amused at the facetious tone of his letter and also at the whimsical nature of his request. There was a charming display of confidence and candor in his language, and nothing in the world could have induced me to deceive him or repay his confidence with ingratitude. I gave my servant a theater ticket, and he left the house at 8 o'clock. A few minutes later, Das Bry arrived. I showed him the letter. "Well," said he, "well, I have left the garden gate unlocked, so anyone can enter. And you? Are you going away?" "Not at all. I intend to stay right here." "But he asks you to go, dash. But I am not going. I will be discreet, but I am resolved to see what takes place." "My foi," exclaimed Das Bry, laughing. "You are right, and I shall stay with you. I shouldn't like to miss it." We were interrupted by the sound of the doorbell. "Here already," said Das Bry. 20 minutes ahead of time. Incredible. I went to the door and ushered in the visitor. It was Madame Andermatt. She was faint and nervous, and in a stammering voice, she ejaculated, "My husband is coming. He has an appointment. They intend to give him the letters." "How do you know?" I asked. "By chance. A message came from my husband while we were at dinner. The servant gave it to me by mistake. My husband grabbed it quickly, but he was too late. I had read it." "You read it?" "Yes. It was something like this. At 9 o'clock this evening, be at Boulevard Millau with the papers connected with the affair. In exchange, the letters. So after dinner, I hastened here." "Unknown to your husband?" "Yes." "What do you think about it?" asked Das Bry, turning to me. "I think as you do, that Mon. Andermatt is one of the invited guests." "Yes, but for what purpose?" "That is what we're going to find out." I led them to a large room. The three of us could hide comfortably behind the velvet chimney mantel and observe all that should happen in the room. We seated ourselves there, with Madame Andermatt in the center. The clock struck 9. A few minutes later, the garden gate creaked upon its hinges. I confess that I was greatly agitated. I was about to learn the key to the mystery. The startling events of the last few weeks were about to be explained, and under my eyes, the last battle was going to be fought. Das Bry seized the hand of Madame Andermatt and said to her, "Not a word, not a movement. Whatever you may see or hear, keep quiet." Someone entered. It was Alfred Varron. I recognized him at once, owing to the close resemblance he bore to his brother Etienne. There was the same slouching gait, the same cadaverous face covered with a black beard. He entered with the nervous air of a man who is accustomed to fear the presence of traps and ambushes, who scents and avoids them. He glanced about the room, and I had the impression that the chimney, masked with a velvet portiere, did not please him. He took 3 steps in our direction, when something caused him to turn and walk toward the old mosaic king, with the flowing beard and flamboyant sword, which he examined minutely, mounting on a chair and following with his fingers the outlines of the shoulders and head and feeling certain parts of the face. Suddenly, he leaped from the chair and walked away from it. He had heard the sound of approaching footsteps. "Mon!" Andermatt appeared at the door. You!" exclaimed the banker. "Was it you who brought me here?" "By no means," protested Varron, in a rough, jerky voice that reminded me of his brother. "On the contrary, it was your letter that brought me here." "My letter?" "A letter signed by you, in which you offered that." "I never wrote to you," declared Mon. "Andermatt, you did not write to me." Instinctively, Varron was put on his guard, not against the banker, but against the unknown enemy who had drawn him into this trap. A second time he looked in our direction, then walked toward the door. "But Mon!" Andermatt barred his passage. "Well, where are you going, Varron?" "There is something about this affair I don't like." "I'm going home. Good evening." "One moment. No need of that, Mon." "Andermatt, I have nothing to say to you, but I have something to say to you, and this is a good time to say it. Let me pass." "No, you will not pass." Varron recoiled before the resolute attitude of the banker, as he muttered, "Well then, be quick about it." One thing astonished me, and I have no doubt my 2 companions experienced a similar feeling. Why was Salvatore not there? Was he not a necessary party at this conference? Or was he satisfied to let these 2 adversaries fight it out between themselves? At all events, his absence was a great disappointment, although it did not detract from the dramatic strength of the situation. After a moment, Mon, Andermatt approached Varron and, face to face, eye to eye, said, "Now, after all these years, and when you have nothing more to fear, you can answer me candidly. What have you done with Louis Lacombe?" "What a question! As if I knew anything about him." "You do know." You and your brother were his constant companions, almost lived with him in this very house. You knew all about his plans and his work. And the last night I ever saw Louis Lacombe, when I parted with him at my door, I saw two men slinking away in the shadows of the trees. That I am ready to swear to. Well, what has that to do with me? The two men were you and your brother. Prove it. The best proof is that 2 days later, you yourself showed me the papers and the plans that belonged to Lacombe and offered to sell them. How did these papers come into your possession? I've already told you, Mon, Andamit, that we found them on Louis Lacombe's table the morning after his disappearance. That is a lie. Prove it. The law will prove it. Why did you not appeal to the law? Why? Why, stammered the banker, with a slight display of emotion. You know very well, Mon, Andamit, if you had the least certainty of our guilt, our little threat would not have stopped you. What threat? Those letters? Do you suppose I ever gave those letters a moment's thought? If you did not care for the letters, why did you offer me thousands of francs for their return? And why did you have my brother and me tracked like wild beasts? To recover the plans? Nonsense. You wanted the letters. You knew that as soon as you had the letters in your possession, you could denounce us. Oh, no, I couldn't part with them. He laughed heartily, but stopped suddenly and said, But enough of this. We are merely going over old ground. We make no headway. We had better let things stand as they are. We will not let them stand as they are, said the banker. And since you have referred to the letters, let me tell you that you will not leave this house until you deliver up those letters. I shall go when I please. You will not. Be careful, Mon. Andamit. I warn you, I say, you shall not go. We will see about that, cried Varin, in such a rage that Madame Andamit could not suppress a cry of fear. Varin must have heard it, for he now tried to force his way out. Mon! Andamit pushed him back. Then I saw him put his hand into his coat pocket. For the last time, let me pass, he cried. The letters first. Varin drew a revolver and, pointing it at Mon, Andamit said, Yes or no? The banker stooped quickly. There was the sound of a pistol shot. The weapon fell from Varin's hand. I was amazed. The shot was fired close to me. It was Dasbray who had fired it at Varin, causing him to drop the revolver. In a moment, Dasbray was standing between the two men, facing Varin. He said to him, with a sneer, You were lucky, my friend, very lucky. I fired at your hand and struck only the revolver. Both of them looked at him, surprised. Then he turned to the banker and said, I beg your pardon, monsieur, for meddling in your business, but really, you play a very poor game. Let me hold the cards. Turning again to Varin, Dasbray said, It's between us two, comrade, and play fair, if you please. Hearts are trumps, and I play the 7. Then Dasbray held up, before Varin's bewildered eyes, the little iron plate, marked with the 7 red spots. It was a terrible shock to Varin. With livid features, staring eyes, and an air of intense agony, the man seemed to be hypnotized at the sight of it. Who are you? He gasped. One who meddles in other people's business, down to the very bottom. What do you want? What you brought here tonight? I brought nothing. Yes, you did, or you wouldn't have come. This morning, you receive an invitation to come here at 9 o'clock and bring with you all the papers held by you. You are here. Where are the papers? There was in Dasbray's voice and manner a tone of authority that I did not understand. His manner was usually quite mild and conciliatory. Absolutely conquered, Varin placed his hand on one of his pockets and said, The papers are here. All of them? Yes. All that you took from Louis Lacombe and afterwards sold to Major von Liebens? Yes. Are these the copies or the originals? I have the originals. How much do you want for them? 100,000 francs. You are crazy, said Dasbray. Why, the Major gave you only 20,000, and that was like money thrown into the sea, as the boat was a failure at the preliminary trials. They didn't understand the plans. The plans are not complete. Then, why do you ask me for them? Because I want them. I offer you 5,000 francs. Not a sou more. 10,000. Not a sou less. Agreed, said Dasbray, who now turned to Mon Andamit and said, Monsieur will kindly sign a check for the amount. But I haven't got your checkbook? Here it is. Astounded, Mon. Andermatt examined the checkbook that Dasbray handed to him. It is mine, he gasped. How does that happen? No idle words, monsieur, if you please. You have merely to sign. The banker took out his fountain pen, filled out the check, and signed it. Verin held out his hand for it. Put down your hand, said Dasbray. There is something more? Then, to the banker, he said, You asked for some letters, did you not? Yes, a package of letters. Where are they, Verin? I haven't got them. Where are they, Verin? I don't know. My brother had charge of them. They are hidden in this room. In that case, you know where they are. How should I know? Was it not you who found the hiding place? You appear to be as well informed as Salvatore. The letters are not in the hiding place. They are. Open it. Verin looked at him defiantly. Were not Dasbray and Salvatore the same person? Everything pointed to that conclusion. If so, Verin risked nothing in disclosing a hiding place already known. Open it, repeated Dasbray. I have not got the 7 of hearts. Yes, here it is, said Dasbray, handing him the iron plate. Verin recoiled in terror and cried, No, I will not. Never mind, replied Dasbray, as he walked toward the bearded king, climbed on a chair, and applied the 7 of hearts to the lower part of the sword in such a manner that the edges of the iron plate coincided exactly with the 2 edges of the sword. Then, with the assistance of an awl which he introduced alternately into each of the 7 holes, he pressed upon 7 of the little mosaic stones. As he pressed upon the 7th one, a clicking sound was heard, and the entire bust of the king turned upon a pivot, disclosing a large opening lined with steel. It was really a fireproof safe. You can see, Verin, the safe is empty. So I see. Then, my brother has taken out the letters. Dasbray stepped down from the chair, approached Verin, and said, Now, no more nonsense with me. There is another hiding place. Where is it? There is none. Is it money you want? How much? 10,000. Monsieur Andermatt. Are those letters worth 10,000 francs to you? Yes, said the banker firmly. Verin closed the safe, took the 7 of hearts, and placed it again on the sword at the same spot. He thrust the awl into each of the 7 holes. There was the same clicking sound, but this time, strange to relate, it was only a portion of the safe that revolved on the pivot, disclosing quite a small safe that was built within the door of the larger one. The packet of letters was here, tied with a tape, and sealed. Verin handed the packet to Dasbray. The latter turned to the banker and asked, Is the check ready, Monsieur Andermatt? Yes. And you have also the last document that you received from Louis Lacombe? The one that completes the plans of the submarine? Yes. The exchange was made. Dasbray pocketed the document and the checks, and offered the packet of letters to Mon. Andermatt, this is what you wanted, monsieur. The banker hesitated a moment, as if he were afraid to touch those cursed letters that he had sought so eagerly. Then, with a nervous movement, he took them. Close to me, I heard a moan. I grasped Madame Andermatt's hand. It was cold. I believe, monsieur, said Dasbray to the banker, that our business is ended. Oh, no thanks. It was only by a mere chance that I have been able to do you a good turn. Good night. Mon. Andermatt retired. He carried with him the letters written by his wife to Louis Lacombe. Marvelous, exclaimed Dasbray, delighted. Everything is coming our way. Now, we have only to close our little affair, comrade. You have the papers? Here they are, all of them. Dasbray examined them carefully and then placed them in his pocket. Quite right. You have kept your word, he said. But what? The 2 checks? The money, said Verin eagerly. Well, you have a great deal of assurance, my man. How dare you ask such a thing? I ask only what is due to me. Can you ask pay for returning papers that you stole? Well, I think not. Verin was beside himself. He trembled with rage. His eyes were bloodshot. The money, the 20,000, he stammered. Impossible. I need it myself. The money! Come, be reasonable, and don't get excited. It won't do you any good. Dasbray seized his arm so forcibly that Verin uttered a cry of pain. Dasbray continued, Now you can go. The air will do you good. Perhaps you want me to show you the way. Ah, yes, we will go together to the vacant lot near here, and I will show you a little mound of earth and stones, and under it That is false. That is false. Oh, No, it is true. That little iron plate with the 7 spots on it came from there. Louis Lacombe always carried it, and you buried it with the body, and with some other things that will prove very interesting to a judge and jury. Varon covered his face with his hands and muttered, "All right, I am beaten. Say no more. But I want to ask you one question. I should like to know, what is it? Was there a little casket in the large safe?" "Yes." "Was it there on the night of June 22nd? "Yes." "What did it contain?" "Everything that the Varon brothers had put in it. A very pretty collection of diamonds and pearls picked up here and there by the said brothers." "And did you take it?" "Of course I did. Do you blame me?" "I understand. It was the disappearance of that casket that caused my brother to kill himself." "Probably. The disappearance of your correspondence was not a sufficient motive. But the disappearance of the casket, is that all you wish to ask me? One thing more? Your name? You ask that with an idea of seeking revenge? Parbleu! The tables may be turned. Today, you are on top. Tomorrow, it will be you. I hope so. Your name? Arsène Lupin." Arsène Lupin. The man staggered, as though stunned by a heavy blow. Those 2 words had deprived him of all hope. Dasbray laughed and said, "Ah, did you imagine that a Monsieur Durand or Dupont could manage an affair like this? No, it required the skill and cunning of Arsène Lupin. And now that you have my name, go and prepare your revenge. Arsène Lupin will wait for you." Then he pushed the bewildered Varon through the door. "Dasbray! Dasbray!" I cried, pushing aside the curtain. He ran to me. What's the matter?" "Madame Andermatt is ill." He hastened to her, caused her to inhale some salts, and while caring for her, questioned me. "Well, what did it?" "The letters of Louis Lacombe that you gave to her husband." He struck his forehead and said, "Did she think that I could do such a thing? But of course she would. Imbecile that I am." Madame Andermatt was now revived. Dasbray took from his pocket a small package exactly similar to the one that Andermatt had carried away. "Here are your letters, madam. These are the genuine letters. But the others? The others are the same, rewritten by me and carefully worded. Your husband will not find anything objectionable in them, and will never suspect the substitution since they were taken from the safe in his presence. But the handwriting, there is no handwriting that cannot be imitated." She thanked him in the same words she might have used to a man in her own social circle, so I concluded that she had not witnessed the final scene between Varon and Arsène Lupin. But the surprising revelation caused me considerable embarrassment. Lupin, my club companion, was none other than Arsène Lupin. I could not realize it, but he said quite at his ease, "You can say farewell to Jean Dasbray." "Ah, yes, Jean Dasbray is going on a long journey. I shall send him to Morocco. There, he may find a death worthy of him. I may say that that is his expectation. But Arsène Lupin will remain? Oh, decidedly. Arsène Lupin is simply at the threshold of his career, and he expects I was impelled by curiosity to interrupt him, and leading him away from the hearing of Madame Andermatt, I asked, "Did you discover the smaller safe yourself? The one that held the letters?" "Yes, after a great deal of trouble. I found it yesterday afternoon while you were asleep. And yet, God knows it was simple enough. But the simplest things are the ones that usually escape our notice." Then, showing me the 7 of hearts, he added, "Of course I had guessed that in order to open the larger safe, this card must be placed on the sword of the Mosaic king." "How did you guess that?" "Quite easily. Through private information. I knew that fact when I came here on the evening of June 22nd, after you left me, Yes, after turning the subject of our conversation to stories of crime and robbery, which were sure to reduce you to such a nervous condition that you would not leave your bed, but would allow me to complete my search uninterrupted. The scheme worked perfectly. Well, I knew when I came here that there was a casket concealed in a safe with a secret lock, and that the 7 of hearts was the key to that lock. I had merely to place the card upon the spot that was obviously intended for it. An hour's examination showed me where the spot was. 1 hour. Observe the fellow in mosaic. The old emperor? That old emperor is an exact representation of the king of hearts on all playing cards. That's right. But how does the seven of hearts open the larger safe at one time and the smaller safe at another time? And why did you open only the larger safe in the first instance? I mean, on the night of June 22nd. Why? Because I always place the seven of hearts in the same way. I never change the position. But yesterday, I observed that by reversing the card, by turning it upside down, the arrangement of the seven spots on the mosaic was changed. Parbleu. Of course, parbleu. But a person has to think of those things. There is something else. You did not know the history of those letters until Madame Andermatt spoke of them before me? No, because I found in the safe, besides the casket, nothing but the correspondence of the two brothers which disclosed their treachery in regard to the plans. Then it was by chance that you were led first to investigate the history of the two brothers, and then to search for the plans and documents relating to the submarine? Simply by chance? For what purpose did you make the search? Mon Dieu, exclaimed Daspry, laughing. How deeply interested you are! The subject fascinates me. Very well. Presently, after I have escorted Madame Andermatt to a carriage and dispatched a short story to the Echo de France, I will return and tell you all about it. He sat down and wrote one of those short, clear-cut articles which serve to amuse and mystify the public. Who does not recall the sensation that followed that article produced throughout the entire world? Arsène Lupin has solved the problem recently submitted by Salvatore. Having acquired possession of all the documents and original plans of the engineer Louis Lacombe, he has placed them in the hands of the Minister of Marine, and he has headed a subscription list for the purpose of presenting to the nation the first submarine constructed from those plans. His subscription is 20,000 francs. 20,000 francs. The check's a mon. Andermatt, I exclaimed when he had given me the paper to read. Exactly. It was quite right that Varin should redeem his treachery. And that is how I made the acquaintance of Arsène Lupin. That is how I learned that Jean Daspry, a member of my club, was none other than Arsène Lupin, gentleman thief. That is how I formed very agreeable ties of friendship with that famous man. And, thanks to the confidence with which he honored me, how I became his very humble and faithful historiographer.